Chapter 16 in Brian's Winter. The weather warmed and he started to run the next day. Not literally. It was all he could do to walk fast in the snowshoes. But in the sense that wolves run, he decided to see more, be more, and not spend all of his time in the shelter just between kills and looking out the door now and then. He wanted more. The snowshoes and some confidence made him free. He took his warbow and lance, a deerskin quiver of arrows on his back, a propane lighter, and enough meat for the day wrapped in a hanging pouch of deer hide, and ran the way wolves run, course just to see what he could see. He moved out from the shelter in gradual circles, discovering the land. The first few days he did not go far. He had a slight concern about becoming lost and decided it didn't matter. He would always find his way back by the snowshoe tracks, even if they filled in. It took him some time to find his way to the shelter. In a very real sense, he was always home now in the woods. With the bow and hatchet at his belt, and the lighter to start a fire, and snowshoes to keep him above the snow, he had become a creature of winter. Home was where he stopped to have a fire. At the end of the week, the warm weather held, rising to 30 above during the day. He actually stayed out from the shelter for a night and sat by a fire in his clothes, listening to the wolves howling, seeing 1,000 diamond eyes from the firelight glittering in the snow around the fire pit. The next day it grew warmer still, and he was working a ridge about 4 miles from the camp hunting a moose. He had no intention of killing the moose, but was hunting like a wolf. Not always to kill, but to know, to see. He had seen the moose, a large bull with both antlers gone, earlier in the day, and he had locked onto its tracks and followed a quarter-mile back, watching the moose through the trees as the moose nibbled on the small willow shoots Brian had seen the deer eating. They made it look so good. He tried them but spit it out like wood because it tasted like wood to him, and he spit. Let me try that whole sentence again. They made it look so good. He tried them, but as they tasted like wood to him, he spit it out. The moose didn't know Brian was there, and Brian studied him carefully, watching him eat and move. The moose was huge, enormous, twice as big as the cow Brian had killed, and maybe larger still, and Brian doubted that even with a full draw and a very sharp arrow, he could get a shaft deep enough to kill him. Perhaps with the lance and a good solid lunge, or by having the bull run on the spears as the cow had done. He was thinking this way, watching the bull from beneath an overhanging pine branch about 100 yards away, imagining what he would have to do to get the moose if he ever wanted it. Then he saw the wolf kill. At first he didn't recognize what was coming. He saw the moose stiffen and turns its head, his huge ears alert and forward. Then in a shadow he saw a flash of gray, just a touch, moving across the rear of the moose. Wolf. He had just enough time to think the word when he saw another gray shape swipe through the trees, and again at the rear of the bull. And then 2 more as they came in to cut and dodge, and it looked like 7 or 8 of them, but he thought there were probably only 4. It was enough. The bull tried to fight. He slashed with his front hooves and kicked with his back, swinging and swiveling to meet his attackers, but they kept coming from the side in slashing attacks aimed at the bull's back legs and rear end. They pulled at the hamstrings, cut the back legs until the bull couldn't stand, and as he caved in and settled on the rear, the wolves became frantic and started to tearing at the rear end, opening the bull while he was still alive, ripping at the rear leg muscles and the anus, each bite opening the wound more until the blood came all came until the blood was all over the snow and the wolves were covered in it. And then they ate him that way, pulling at the rear while he still lived, pulling the insides out while he tried to pull himself away with his front legs until he was at last too weak and fell forward, still alive, still living while they ate him. Brian wanted to not see it. He thought killing with the arrow. He had thought killing with the arrows slow and bad, but it was nothing like this. The wolves were crazy with it. The smell of blood and from the hot intestines they pulled from the living moose, and the bull took forever to die. Never died, but just kept sinking down and down while the wolves were eating him alive. Brian shuddered. He had seen the wolves before and had never felt fear. He thought he had seen the wolves before and never had felt fear. He had not thought they would ever attack him, but if they came in like that and pulled him down. He looked away, shook his head. They would not attack. They hadn't yet, and they had plenty of opportunities. They ate deer and moose, and hopefully not boys. But still, Brian left the meeting and moved quietly away. Still, he kept an arrow in his bow, and his fingers on the string, and kept looking over his shoulder back at them, pulling at the bull and gorging on the warm meat. And later that night, in the shelter, he sat by the fire and wondered how it could be so horrible, how nature could let animals suffer the way the moose had suffered. The wolves were not just being natural, he understood, the need to kill. He would himself die if he had not killed, but so slowly. He stared into the flames for a long time, thinking of it, and thought he would dream of it when he slept. But he didn't. Instead, he dreamed of a home, sitting and watching television with his mother and father, and when he awakened it was well past daylight, the latest he had slept in some time. He went outside to the bathroom, and the weather was so soft and warm he didn't need his parka. A warm day in December. And he turned back to build a fire and boil meat when he heard 2 trees explode some distance off. One pop, and then another short pause, and another one. Pop, pop. And he had the fire going on the pot on the snow, and he had the fire going and the pot on with snow and meat set to boil when he realized what he had heard, or what he hadn't heard. It was too warm for the trees to explode.